Hi, my name is Eduardo Ox. I'm the author of an Emacs package called EV, and the title of this video is Why EV comes with a weird elisp tutorial and how to use it. Before starting, let me just explain what is this image here. It's a frame from my most favorite animation movie ever. Its title in English is Gwen or the Book of Sand, and it's available on YouTube. You can watch it there. And one of my missions on Earth is to convince more people to watch that movie. I've watched it more than 30 times. I've showed it to many people, and every time that I watch it, it blows my mind in different ways. Anyway, let me go back. One more thing before starting. Emacs comes with an Emacs Lisp tutorial that is very famous. It's called An Introduction to Programming in Emacs Lisp. It comes as an info manual, and it's actually a book. In using info mode, you can navigate through its chapters, sections, and so on. If you're a beginner, you're probably going to use these things here in the toolbar. If you're not a beginner, you can use, for example, the square brackets to navigate to the previous and the next section in a certain order. And let me use that now to show how big this manual is. These are all its sections and subsections and so on. And it's huge, very huge. Oh no, it never ends. That's it. So, a zillion of sections, and well, an EV comes with a very short tutorial on Emacs Lisp that you can access by just typing meta 7 meta j here. Let's see its size. Let me turn on the scroll bar here. If we scroll here and go to the end of the tutorial, it's here. It has just a bit more than 600 lines. I say here that this is a very quick introduction to Emacs Lisp. My intent here is not to teach people how to write Lisp code, only to teach them to read Lisp code. I consider that reading and writing are two different stages. And in the beginning, people are mostly going to want to read things like to understand what the source code means, or to understand how a certain template is prepared, and so on. And I say here that different people prefer different kinds of tutorials, and many people, actually most people, love the introduction to Emacs Lisp, this one here, but I don't. And in this video I'm going to explain why. And this tutorial here, this short one, is what I would have liked to have had access when I started learning Emacs Lisp. So let me go back a second. I started to write this tutorial because I was invited to teach a mini course on LaTeX to students that have never used Emacs before. And I said, okay, I'm going to teach it, but everybody's going to be forced to use Emacs and AV, but I'm going to do it in a certain way. It's not going to be very painful. And so I used EV to make people learn Emacs in a certain way. And every time that a person had a curiosity about something in Lisp and wanted to understand the syntax or the defines or back quotes or whatever, I said, oh, look at this sections, search and search of my Lisp tutorial. So these people knew very few keys of Emacs in the beginning. They basically knew the three most basic keys that are meta E, meta K, and meta J. Meta E executes the sexp in the current line. Meta k can be used to kill the current buffer, which usually means to go back. And meta j jumps to several different places. And if you run meta j without a numeric argument, it shows this temporary buffer here. That here it shows some of the main targets that have numbers assigned to them. And here you can see the other targets. So this line here means that if you type meta j with the numeric prefix 7, it is going to execute this thing here that goes to the elisp tutorial. And these are the things that are most basic, that beginners learn first. These things here, this one here is the basic tutorial called Find AV Quick Intro. This one is a fake tutorial that is mostly an index of keys. And this one here opens a buffer with our notes. And I always say to the beginners that in the beginning they should put all their notes in this buffer here, and that they shouldn't mind if their notes are messy. They can clean them up later. And this thing here also shows some keys for opening the file with notes in the window at the right from any place. So for example, if we are in the elisp tutorial here, and we find something interesting, say on section 3, for example, this block here, we can run this thing here, show a buffer with notes at the window at the right, and we can copy the thing here to our notes. Just one comment before showing other things. Meta 7 meta j goes to the elisp tutorial, and the last line of this header says that you can open this tutorial or recreate it with meta 7 meta j. It is a sandbox in the sense that you can make any mess here and then recreate it. Some other tutorials have numbers like this. For example, this is the fake tutorial that is just an index, and it says that you can access this thing with meta 5, meta 0, meta j, and these ones I have already shown. One important thing is that people can create links to the sections of my elisp tutorial very easily. For example, suppose that you're one of the students in my workshop. You are starting to learn Emacs today, and you learned the basic ideas of how to create elisp hyperlinks. And you think that there's something interesting in this section here, 5. So you can create a link to it by hand. For example, you can simply type this, find elisp intro, initially by hand, then you can learn, later you can learn the tricks for generating this automatically, and you can copy the title to this position here. And now you have something that if you execute this, you go exactly to this section here. But let me go back. Let me now explain some differences in style between the standard tutorial and my tutorial. I think that the first thing that made me dislike the Emacs Lisp intro is that it is an introduction to programming in Emacs Lisp for people who are not programmers. And I was trying very hard to become a programmer. I was really thinking like a programmer, and I was taking notes and creating exercises and so on. And so this thing felt more like a book that should be read like a book, not like code that you can execute by just typing meta E. And it felt non-Emacsy. I also said that this is huge. This is the menu with the chapters and sections and subsections and so on. In some situations, it has faces here in the sense of different fonts, and sometimes it's not totally clear if this difference is important or not. If we copy a part of this to our notes and we save our notes, then the faces are going to disappear. The thing is going to become plain text without the different fonts. Also, the manual is full of examples like this that are not complete chunks of code. They are just excerpts from bigger functions. And so, in short, it is big, it is hard to navigate because it has a zillion of sections, it uses faces, it is read-only. Remember that in my tutorial you can duplicate a line, for example, and check what happens if you change one item of a list by something else. For example, what happens if you change this by 40 or by a string, and you can execute these things here. So this is a sandbox where you can execute things. And this does not happen in the Emacs Lisp intro. Also, the Emacs Lisp intro has just a few executable examples per page, while my tutorial has many. For example, here, all these things are different examples. One thing that really bothered me is that I prefer to believe that Emacs was made in two levels. First, people took a Lisp interpreter. No, sorry, three levels. People first took a Lisp interpreter, and then they programmed in it a handful of functions for dealing with keys and buffers, files, windows, and so on. Just a few basic things. And at one point, they had a very basic editor that had Lisp inside, and they could change this Lisp interactively using the editor itself. And then they started to build an editor that was much more powerful, and also to extend the Lisp with more advanced features. But I prefer to think that we have this division with basic Lisp on the bottom, and then basic editing functions on top, and then a huge structure with zillions of editing functions. And the Emacs Lisp tutorial does not make this distinction very clearly, and it explains basic Lisp at the same time as the Emacs Lisp functions, because it wants to explain how people can write useful functions, and useful functions are usually functions that edit things. Another thing that I really don't like in it is that it has very few links to the primary sources. Here we are inside Emacs, and it's very easy to access uh, each one of the manuals and the source code. For example, here I have a section of my tutorial that ends with this block here. It says, for more info on the other types of Lisp objects, Lisp objects, sorry, there's a typo here, see blah blah blah. And each of these things is a link to the Emacs Lisp manual. Also, here we have links to the Wikipedia. In other places we have links to the Emacs manual. And I think that in a couple of places we have links to the source code too. And the Emacs Lisp tutorial does not do that. It is made to be the online version of a book. And I think that this is a bit frustrating. And the main point, and this is something that very people have noticed, is that my tutorial works in two ways. It has some contents here, so people can read it, but it also has lots of design choices and stylistical choices. I decided to present things in a certain way. And people, when people run these examples, they're probably going to become familiar with these stylistical choices, and when they want to take their own notes, they're probably going to use some of these ideas on their notes. So they are going to do something like this, in which they put several similar examples close to one another, starting by the most basic ones. They can also put just a bit of text instead of having to explain lots of things, and they are also, I hope, they will also try to use this style here, in which we put important links to everything that we find. So instead of trying to reproduce the explanations with our own words, we just put the links to the sources where we can find the full explanation. And the idea is that when people are learning some more advanced things that are not in the manual, they can write their notes in this format, and they can even share these notes with other people. And in my workshops, I often have some moments in which people share their notes, and of course people who want to write notes that are useful to other people, and notes that are easier to change, easier to collaborate on. And so one of my intentions of my tutorials was to suggest a certain style and convince people that they could write their notes in this style here. This tutorial is very incomplete. It just teaches the basic ideas, but it also has a link here at the end for another tutorial. That's a tutorial on lexical binding. And it's very extensible. And by the way, in several places in the source code of EV, I have examples that follow exactly the same conventions, but they appear in comments. So people can also execute these examples in comments to understand ideas step by step, starting from most basic cases and then building more complex functions on top of that. Let me see. So yeah, that's what I wanted to present. My tutorial is much more do-it-yourselfish than the Emacs Lisp intro. And I confess that I always find the reactions to my tutorial quite puzzling, because I think that my tutorial is very nice, but sometimes I participate in discussions in the Max mailing list, and someone asks, "Oh, how do I do this? How can I learn, for example, how to use backquote?" And they say, there's blah blah blah, this link to the manual, this link to the other manual, and so on. But I recommend trying the examples in my tutorial and so on. You just need to learn the keys search and search, and go to the section. Let me see, backquote, section 10. And I never get any answers. I have the impression that people think that my tutorial is far too weird. It's like the product of a totally alien mind, and no one uses it, no one comments on it, and then it's always, I don't know, something that just has to be ignored when I mention it. And I want to fix this, and this video is hopefully a first step to make my tutorial less mysterious. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show. Bye.